Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about a token that's really interesting because it's kind of sitting right in the middle of three of the hottest crypto sectors that we've seen so far this bull run. The first one's AI, the second one is RWA, which is real world assets, and the third one is DePIN, which is decentralized physical infrastructure networks. And so this is a really interesting token because it kind of has the ability to kind of hit on any of those three narratives, all three of which we have seen do really quite well over the past months or so, right? And so, however, before we get into the video, I did just want to provide a quick disclaimer. This video has been sponsored by PinLink, which is the project we are going to be talking about today. Rest assured though, I get several requests to have sponsored videos on the channel. I personally kind of live by the ethos that if it's not something that I find personally interesting or wouldn't at least seriously consider investing in myself, I'm not really super interested in talking about them on the channel. I'm not just going to bring anything that is willing to pay me. I want to keep like a level of high quality projects only, at least in my opinion. Again, this is not financial advice. You need to make your own investment decisions and all of that type of stuff because, again, these are just all my opinions. But ultimately, like I'm only trying to work with high quality projects that I believe in and think could do really well in this upcoming cycle. And so anyway, with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in and check out PinLink. So PinLink is a really interesting idea because what it's doing is it's honestly kind of, I would say, bringing like a legitimate business venture that already happens in the real world to crypto and essentially using crypto to enable it. And so essentially what it is, it's the first RWA tokenized DePIN marketplace. Now, obviously that's kind of a mouthful. We're going to go through this, break it down a little bit in terms of kind of what that means, what that looks like, all of that type of stuff. But first off, we'll kind of scroll through here, check out the website. The website does a pretty comprehensive job of like going through and explaining exactly what they're doing. We can see they've got their RWA tokenized DePIN model and the first fractionalized liquidity layer for DePIN. Now, again, a lot of words here. If you don't understand what some of these mean, we are going to get into them in a little bit more detail further on in the video. So anyway, moving on, what we can see is they do have their Pin AI performance optimization suite. Basically just applies machine learning tools to optimize the outputs of DePIN assets for AI developers. Again, pretty cool overall. What we can see like continuing along here though is, I think this website of like running through a GPU, I think is pretty cool. We can see essentially what they're trying to do is create a network in which people can use GPU. So that's kind of where the AI comes in. So developers can come in, run their models on PinLink's AI infrastructure. However, the infrastructure is, again, DePIN, right? Because it's decentralized. Anybody can contribute equipment or, assets or whatever to this physicalized infrastructure network to essentially help like support this AI network, right? Well, now the thing that's interesting here about RWA is kind of the layer that they've added on top of all of this, which is you now can essentially, like, let's say I decide I want to buy, 10 GPUs. And obviously that's going to be like a somewhat substantial capital outlay, right? Well, maybe I don't want to be in like the capital business. I want to be in the operating of GPUs business. So what I could do is I could essentially fractionalize the ownership. Let's say these are like H100s or like really, really high end GPUs. Then what I could do is I could maybe say each H100, I'm going to sell off a tenth of each of the H100s because obviously they are expensive. It might be a little bit of like a high cost or a high barrier to entry for somebody who's more retail. But what I could do is I could fractionalize these and then put them on PinLink's network. And now let's say I could own a tenth of an H100. And so then I will essentially be allocated the earnings of the tenth of the earnings that H100 generates. So it's a really interesting idea. Obviously we'll continue on it and get a little bit more into the details here. But this is essentially how PinLink works, right? So what we can see is here's the actual like compute. We can see the DePIN asset owner. So this would be somebody who actually owns the asset. They're contributing it to the network to provide compute basically, right? Here we have the DePIN service user. This is the person who actually needs the compute. And here we can see they're paying the rental fee and then they're essentially getting like the supplies of the DePIN services. Now here we can see that all of the rental fees from the compute that's provided here is actually sent to this ERC 1155 contract. And this is where things kind of essentially start to get a little bit interesting, right? And so what we can see here is that to the DePIN asset owner, they will get 80% of the RWA sales fees. So essentially like the sales price of fractionalizing it and sending it off. And then they'll also get their proportional share of rental fees based on however, like what ownership percentage they retain, right? What we can also see here is we have the passive income seeker. So this would be the person who's essentially looking to buy fractionalized GPUs or, DePIN assets of whatever type. Probably going to be AI just based on kind of what the space that they're focusing in. But that's what we're doing here. And then also also what we can see is we have the ERC1155 sends the rental fees to the NFT contract, and then this is the service user rebate fund. Now this whole thing right here is where things get a little bit more complicated, but essentially what this whole like chain is here is this is essentially almost like a subsidy that PinLink is trying to run itself to incentivize onboarding DePIN users, because obviously with this whole kind of network that we have set up, not only do you need people contributing assets, but you also need people using those assets, and then you also need people contributing the capital to essentially like pay the asset owners back so they can then go buy more assets and contribute more to that network. Again, it's a flywheel, right? But what PinLink is doing from their end is they're sitting here and they're actually essentially subsidizing, because PinLink does collect like a service fee. It's like a platform fee, right? I mean, very, very standard within the industry. They're essentially collecting like a platform fee, and they're using this platform fee, at least right now, to essentially subsidize what the DePIN service users are paying. So it's easier to onboard people, which I think is a really, really good idea, because obviously this is kind of like an economies of scale type of thing. The more you have of everything, the more you're going to get more of everything, right? I mean, it's one of those like, there's kind of like network effects. Once people know that PinLink is the place to go, then everybody's going to go to PinLink. But until they know that, nobody knows. And so it's kind of getting over that critical mass. And so I think one of the ways that you can incentivize that is by essentially providing subsidies. This obviously can change into the future, but that is essentially how the structure is set up currently. Now, moving along, what we can see with key features is they're going to go over essentially kind of the main things that make PinLink. First one is the RWA tokenized DePIN marketplace. This is essentially like where people go to buy fractionalized shares of the DePIN asset that they're looking for. This is essentially turned into like an ERC 1155 asset, and this is how people essentially are receiving their yield, and it's still a trustless system because an ERC 1155 is a smart contract, so it just kind of does all of the things that it's supposed to automatically, so there's no real like trust-based anything involved in this. Now, we also have this service user rebate model. This is what we were looking at up there in like the diagram that we were looking at. Is essentially they have the service user rebate model essentially to like go and like reduce the cost burden and help onboard people, do all of this type of stuff to create new revenue sources. So that's what they're doing from there. And then now moving on though, those are essentially like the two key things. Where we're at now is we're looking at the roadmap. And so first off, we can see only protocol owned DePIN assets are accepted. So this is the other part about using the rebates, is PinLink is actually owning some of the assets on the network, right? And in the yield or the revenue generated from their assets, they're also essentially contributing to that subsidy model that we were talking about here earlier. So that's where we're at right now is phase one, and then phase two is opening up PinLink to third-party DePIN asset owners. So this is essentially where they're going in the future. Now, if we jump on over to Tokenomics real quick, we can see that there's 100 million supply, and it's on Ethereum, of course. Now, 80% was contributed to the Uniswap LP, so it's essentially like kind of a fair launch, I guess you could say, for at least 80% of it. 10% is for staking emissions, and then 10% is for centralized exchange reserves, which again, in my opinion, this is always a really good thing. Fair launched, like totally fair launch projects, while nice, do have typically, they have issues getting listed on centralized exchanges because there's no like reserve set aside, which means the exchange essentially has to buy in, which can cause some friction. Usually if the project is strong enough and it generates enough trading fees, realistically, they'll buy in and do it anyway, but it can cause a lot more friction essentially getting there. Now, looking at the team, we can see the CEO is a former VP of engineering at Engine, so definitely like some really, really strong backgrounds here. The CEO is kind of obviously the one leading the ship. Engine hit a $4 billion market cap. And so to me, this indicates like, obviously the CEO knows what he's doing. There is a sense of like experience of already being within the ecosystem, all of this type of stuff. So, I mean, that to me is like a really good sign overall. So anyway, that's just a quick overview on PinLink. If you are interested, I will post a link to their website in the description below. And I will also post a link to their X account. Now, going ahead, let's actually take a quick look at their X account, because what we can see here on the X account is that they actually have 9,000 followers at this point. They've been around for a while, joined in February 2023, and essentially you can see, some of the stuff that they're doing. They have made a recent partnership with EtherFi, which obviously EtherFi a really, really strong brand particularly within the Ethereum ecosystem. So there are a lot of partnerships that they are making. I mean, they've partnered with Aether, you can see here. There's a lot of different projects that they partnered with. You can see, I'm even just scrolling through, we can see Maple. If we were to continue a little bit further down, looks like they were in Dubai for the Bitcoin conference. We can see anyone they've partnered with. I mean, there's a whole bunch. Here's the Aether, the Aether announcement. So, I mean, they're always doing like pretty strong announcements here. We could see they've already integrated with Akash, Fetch, LFEM. I mean, tons of different projects here. So, I mean, they're definitely set up pretty well for success. If you ask me, they have the ability to scale from like a capacity side. Now they're just essentially looking to bring on users and developers for revenue and whatnot. This is, I think, going to be where Fetch AI comes in, because that's obviously going to be important. Like, there's a lot of integrations that they've already made within the crypto ecosystem that I do think could be a really interesting and compelling thing. Now, if we do take a quick look at the chart, we can also see this is the daily candles, but what we can see is it's pretty much been up only, having an absolutely insane run. Fully diluted market cap of 368 million, current market cap of 294 million. So honestly, from like a non-diluted perspective, this is looking pretty decent, I would say. Overall, I feel pretty comfortable with that. Obviously, there is going to be some dilution going on, but not a ton in the grand scheme of things, particularly with what we see in crypto. So overall, this to me is looking really, really strong. Obviously, it has made a massive run. Nothing that I say is financial advice, so you will have to make your own decision in terms of, you know, is it a good time to buy in now because we've seen this massive wick? Should we see some level of pullback and maybe some like leveling out first? Obviously, you need to make your own decision there. But overall, I mean, I think it's pretty clear to see, like, this is a really, really strong looking chart. Obviously, volume's continuing to go up as well. Again, especially within the market that it sits in, I think we could easily see this run to $1 billion plus. I think there's a world in which we potentially see multi-billion-dollar market caps out of it, because this is kind of sitting in kind of the sweet spot between a whole bunch of different really hot sectors within crypto. And that to me is kind of like the key selling point. At least, again, for me, you need to make your own like decision. Nothing that I say is financial advice, just because I don't really know your financial situation. I don't know your investing strategy. As I always talk about on the channel, you need to understand what you're buying and why you're buying it. So definitely you need to do your own research, look into it, make sure that you understand their vision, you understand what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, a lot of that type of stuff, because that's going to be very, very important ultimately in helping you make your decision. So anyway, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please do give me a like and subscribe, because it really does help me out. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that, please feel free just to drop those in the comment section below. I'd really be interested to hear your comments on this one. I do really actually think that this is a pretty good project. Obviously, I know that this is a sponsored video, and so they are paying me to like talk about it and whatnot, but even just from like my opinion, we've seen AI projects do incredibly well this year. And so for me, this is one that like, I think it's got a lot of potential there. And so I'm definitely gonna be keeping a really close eye on it, just because I do think that there's definitely something here. And so anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.